Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV, and today we're having a look at Gul'dan from raid testing in the Nighthold on the 7.1.5 PTR.
Yes, the last boss in the Nighthold, we do finally get to test Gul'dan, and you're fighting him on top of the giant palace, and you can see everything around you. It's pretty cool, and there's a big green crystal above him, and all this kind of stuff. It's awesome. Really, really cool looking fight. And it is a 3-phase encounter, but unfortunately we did only get to see 2 of the 3 phases during our testing, so if you are here for some phase 3 footage, then unfortunately we can't help, but we still will be going over those abilities from the dungeon journal and kind of explaining what we think they might do. But we still got to see the entirety of phase 1 and most of phase 2, so we can still have a very good look at the encounter. And of course a full boss guide will be available on our channel once we do kill it on live servers. So let's kick straight into it and let's have a look at some of the extra action buttons that you get to play with.
Yeah, so throughout phase 1 and phase 2, everyone in your entire raid has an extra action button that grants you an ability. This ability you gain depends on what role you're playing. So the tank gets a tank one, healers get a healer one, etc. And these abilities, or the spells that you are given, help you with the mechanics in the fight in one way or another. Tanks are given a barrier. When you use this ability, it causes you to take absolutely no damage whatsoever for 6 seconds, so you're just flat out immune. And this ability mainly you need to use for certain abilities that are very close to one-shotting you. Your healers get something called Scattering Field, which is essentially just a massive disc shield that causes all players that stand inside it just to take less damage, but it's up to a cap. Once 2 mil damage has been absorbed, the shield just gets removed, and it's only fire damage. For your DPS, you get a personal buff that increases your attack speed, casting speed, and movement speed by 30%, and it also reduces your cooldowns by 30% and increases the tick rate of your dots by 30%. This lasts 10 seconds and has a 55-second cooldown. Any fire damage you take during the effect of this ability simply just removes it, which is kind of interesting.
So you've got to be very careful when fire damage is coming in. You've got to make sure that you don't have time dilation up, otherwise you're kind of wasting it. So let's kick it into phase 1. Now phase 1 consists of fighting Gul'dan for a short time, and then you'll be fighting 3 different mini bosses, while Gul'dan is immune in a bubble in the middle of the room, throwing spells out towards you. Now the 2 spells we'll be throwing out towards you, one of them is Liquid Hellfire. This will mark a location of a random ranged player and throw a ball of lava at it, dealing a large amount of raid-wide damage which drops off the further away you are from it. Now there is already a hell of a lot of movement in this phase, so we decided rather than have everyone like run away or be spread out to reduce the amount of damage taken from this ability, we decided to have all of our ranged DPS and healers stack up all in one chunk. Then we just used the healer's extra action button barrier ability to help absorb some of the damage. Unfortunately, you can't use all of them every single time because it comes in too frequently, so you kind of have to alternate which set of healers are going to be using the barrier each time. So set A will cover every odd one, and set B will cover every even one, but you can cover it and the damage taken from it isn't too high. The other ability that he has is Fell Efflux. He will face a random direction and then send out a large beam of fire towards it, dealing a ton of damage to anyone who stands inside it. You can see which direction he's going to be casting this in, as he has to charge it up a little bit beforehand, so you can use this time to easily move out of the way of it, and because it is fire damage as well, if you've got time dilation up in it, you're going to be losing that damage buff, so it's really important that you try and avoid this as much as you possibly can. And on top of this, he will be summoning those 3 mini bosses for you to fight, so let's go through them in order of which you want to kill them. So let's talk about Inquisitor Vethriz. Now he'll periodically just blink around the encounter area, which is a pain in the ass for your melee DPS, so you want to be focusing this guy down, and he'll also be spamming a blast on the tanks, which doesn't do that much damage. One of the main things he does is that he will apply Drain to multiple members of the raid. This is a dispellable dot which heals the mini-boss for each time it deals damage, and it does actually heal him for a fair amount, so of course you want to dispel this as soon as you possibly can. The reason that you're killing this guy first isn't necessarily because of his Drain, but mainly his other ability, which is Gaze of Vethriz. He'll be spamming this ability pretty often, and all it does is just spawn multiple eyes that would just spawn on the ground, start channeling a beam, and then just slowly rotate on the spot, dealing an absolute ton of damage to anyone that is hit by them. So the idea is because he's spawning so many of these eyes and they last for such a long period of time, you'll easily see these active in phase 2, is that you want to kill him off nice and quickly before the whole room is just covered in eyes and you have nowhere to play with in phase 2. So we just make sure that we isolate ourselves to one half of the room, kill him off while filling up that whole space with loads of spinny eyes, and then once he's dead we can move to the free area of the room and finish off the other 2 mini-bosses. The next son that we kill is Fel Lord Kurazmal. He's mainly vicious to your tanks because he casts something called Shatter Essence. This will do 13 million fire damage to your tank. so it's just gonna one-shot your tank.
13 mil.
Yeah, it's just like, here you go. Luckily, it's got a cast time, and luckily you have an extra action button that makes you immune to all damage. So you want to make sure that you do use that extra action button when it comes in. However, it's unlikely that a single tank will have the extra action button for every single Shatter Essence that comes in, so you might need to tank switch to make it so that you will always have an extra action button available when he casts this one-hit mechanic. On top of this, he'll be summoning multiple patches on the ground, which after a short time will erupt into a giant fell obelisk spike. These will do an absolute ton of damage to anyone hit by it, but it will also stun them for 7 seconds and apply a really nasty dot. So really you just see the rumbly patches and you move out of the way. But that isn't always that easy, because there's already a lot of spell effects going on from Gul'dan, like his liquid hellfire and his giant beam that he's casting across the room. So you've got to make sure you're always keeping an eye out for when Fell Lord is casting this fell obelisk. And lastly, you'll be killing off the Trapper, which I have no idea how to say his name. He'll be throwing out lots of Anguish Spirit patches, which will do a large amount of damage hit by them. It's just like green patches that he puts on the ground and then they explode afterwards, so make sure you move out of the way of them. But for your tanks, he'll be doing something called Soul Vortex on you. This will just throw a cage towards you, and this cage will drag in anyone nearby, dealing light ticking damage to them. However, if you get too close to the cage in the middle, you'll be taking extra damage and you'll gain a debuff, which increases all the physical damage you take by 100% for 30 seconds, and this will stack up. And on top of this, each time he casts this ability, the dragon effect of the cage will increase by 100% each time, making it harder and harder for people to avoid gaining stacks. Now, when this was cast on our tanks, we would just have them move away from the group to place it away from anyone else. They would then return to the mini-bosses. It was pretty easy to deal with. However, you cannot avoid taking 1 tick from the cage when it is placed on you as the tank, so you're guaranteed to gain at least 1 stack of that 100% increased physical damage taken debuff, which is kind of shitty. If you can, at that time, have the other tank pick up the remaining mini-bosses, so of course you haven't got the debuff on you, then great. But if push comes to shove, you can just use a couple of cooldowns. The bosses don't do a shit ton of melee damage as it is anyway.
So just to summarize this phase, really every time the liquid hellfire bullshit came in, we just used healing cooldowns as well as using the healing extra action button just to absorb a bit of that extra damage. We kept to one side of the room just so all the eyes stayed in that particular area. We made sure we avoided the big beam coming out of Gul'dan's face, as well as all the circle effects that keep spawning on the ground from both the other mini-bosses, and then moved over to the other side and killed both the mini-bosses after that. And it's at that point, Gul'dan will no longer be immune, and phase 2 begins. But right at the start of the phase, he'll knock everyone back, and if you're stood in certain locations, you'll actually be completely knocked off the platform. This happened a couple of times.
It's best just to be close to him, because he also destroys all the structure around you as well, and they don't act as walls anymore, so you can just go straight through the walls. Yeah, it's pretty bad, so don't get knocked off.
Now in this phase, he will still be doing his liquid hellfire. We were dealing with this the exact same way as we was in phase 1, but he'll also gain a few other abilities. One of them is Bonds of Fel. What he'll do is that he'll debuff a couple of targets with this ability, which slows you by 50%, and you'll start taking ticking damage. The only way that you can remove this debuff is simply by moving away from the location where you initially got the debuff. It's like the chains on Archimond as an example. However, when you do finally break it, you'll take a massive burst of damage that is split between all players within 5 yards of your own character. So as soon as you do decide that you are going to break it, you need a load of players to come run over towards you and follow you out of your bond, and then as soon as it does break, you'll take some damage and then you'll share it to everyone within 5 yards of you. And interestingly enough, the Bonds of Fel, the explosion effect right at the end of it, is actually fire damage. So if you really wanted to, you can actually use the healing absorb shield to sort of take some of the damage. One thing we did think is that if you had perfect timers, you could potentially have everyone stack up on one location and then have the entire raid move as a single unit just to share all this damage. But ultimately, while we were testing, it didn't feel like it was mandatory, it didn't feel like it was necessary. But if you wanted to min-max, that's something you could definitely look at trying on live. Another ability to watch out for is Eye of Gul'dan. When the boss casts his ability, he will spawn several eyes which just hover nearby in melee. All these eyes do is simply just channel onto random players within your raid, dealing a huge amount of damage to them, and also anyone within 8 yards of them. This damage does increase over time. They also have an energy bar, and once this reaches 100%, they will simply duplicate themselves. And the duplicated eyes have the exact same health percentage as their original selves, as well as the exact same attacks. So you need to kill these eyes quick, otherwise they start duplicating, and you'll get to a point where you have so many eyes that you're just going to get fucking annihilated. So when these eyes spawn, we simply had our entire raid swap to them, and it was actually possible to kill the majority of them, sometimes even all of them, before any of them duplicated. And One interesting thing about these eyes, it seems to spawn almost in the exact same timer that time dilation can come out, which is your DPS extra action button. So it feels like maybe it's designed in such a way that everyone is expected to use that cooldown just for the eyes. So when the next set comes in, you can just use it again. Another ad spawning ability is Hand of Gul'dan. When he casts this, he'll just mark an area, which will then explode, which deals damage to anyone that stood inside it. And it'll also spawn a Dreadlord. These Dreadlords need to be picked up by the tank, and everyone needs to switch to it to kill it off because of his one main ability. Almost constantly he'll be spamming Carrion Wave. This is an interruptible cast that just sends out a wave that deals a ton of damage to anyone hit, but also puts them to sleep for 6 seconds. Each time you do interrupt the cast though, he will gain a stack of fervor, which increases his damage down by 20% and his attack speed by 15%. So you need to interrupt the wave, otherwise people are going to be put to sleep, but at the same time, if you just interrupt him and don't do any damage to him, he's going to get to the point where he's just one-hitting your tank, which happened to us many times. So switch to the Dreadlord, kill it off as soon as you possibly can, then go back to Gul'dan. Now on top of all these abilities, Gul'dan has a mechanic that tanks need to deal with, which is Fell Scythe. Now how this ability works is that whenever anyone is within 2 yards of the tank, Gul'dan will simply just cast it. This will do a large amount of fire damage split between the tank and anyone within 2 yards of them. And then on top of this, it will buff Gul'dan by giving him 15% attack speed for 10 seconds, and this does stack. Now Gul'dan, as you've noticed, does have an energy bar, and this energy is used up whenever he does cast the ability. However, for each point of energy that he has used, it increases the damage of Fell Scythe by 5%. And if Gul'dan ever reaches 100% energy, he'll cast Fell Scythe regardless if the tank is anyone nearby or not, whether or not you've even triggered the ability. He'll just do it. And because he has so much energy, that ability is going to do a crazy amount of damage. However, while we were testing, it didn't actually feel that bad, but we can assume once this boss hits live servers, the strategy would be to force the boss to use the ability every 11 seconds, so that way his buff won't stack, but his energy stays low. It stays low enough that he won't ever do like a full 100% energy Fell Scythe into the tank's face.
Yeah, and of course, if the tank really wanted to, they could take that 100% energy Fell Scythe, but with the extra action button, maybe, every now and then, if the other tank's busy dealing with the Dreadlord or something like that. But otherwise, yeah, it seems like you want to trigger it about every 11 seconds so the buff doesn't stack up.
Now as this phase goes on, the boss will actually empower all the abilities we just listed, or most of the abilities that we just listed, at certain health percentages. At 85% health, he'll empower his liquid Hellfire. This causes it to do way more damage, as well as leave a bunch of fire on the ground for 3 whole minutes. The best way to deal with this is simply try and bait the patches to land very near each other, otherwise you're just going to run out of room. There's not that much room to work with as it is, especially if you have eyes from the first phase still up that haven't despawned yet. So putting these patches in the right place definitely felt like the right thing to do. At 70% he'll empower his Bonds of Fel. This empowerment makes it so when the root is initially applied to the player, they'll just be knocked back into a random location and then rooted. And on top of this, that player is slowed a lot more, so it takes longer to break it, and the break itself does even more damage. So this just means that players need to run all over the place to try and free people from these bonds. And this was something that we really struggled on, not gonna lie. It was really difficult to get in a position to break all these Bonds of Fel, and also it's not very clear on exactly where the players are sometimes.
Yeah, there's some people just be like kicked on the other side of the room and it's just like, where are they again?
And there was moments as well where you'd be on top of the players when they broke, but you wouldn't share the damage and they'd just be one shot.
Yeah, it was a little bit buggy, that particular ability, and unfortunately we didn't actually get past that point. We didn't get to see anything more of the encounter, but we do know from the Dungeon Journal, thank you Blizzard, that at 50% he will empower his Eyes of Gul'dan. So instead of like lots of little eyes, it's like one mega eye, which deals like lots of beams on multiple players at once. And it has an aggro table, so it can actually fixate on people and chase them down, and it can still duplicate, and it sounds god awful. So hopefully it isn't too hard to deal with, because when you go into phase 3, which is at 40%, he will actually keep his empowered Eye of Gul'dan as well as his Fell Scythe. So he'll be keeping those abilities, but he has a bunch of other ones as well. Like he has an ability called Flame of Sargeras, which looks to be a debuff, which causes a player to pulse out AoE damage to anyone within 8 yards, and each pulse will leave a pool of shit on the ground, which will then explode, dealing damage and leaving fire on the ground. So when you get this debuff, you'll probably want to run it to the edge of the room, place all the goo away from everyone, and then come back. And you'll probably want to be grouped up quite a lot, because he has like a Manaroth style Fellseeker kind of ability called Storm of the Destroyer, and it seems to be dealing a large amount of damage to ever increasing areas of the room. So if you did Manaroth in Hellfire Citadel, where half of the room is coated in that giant circle and it knocks you off the platform, think like that. It seems to be something similar to that. and he'll also spawn a well of souls. He'll keep putting players' souls inside of it, and players need to enter and stand within the wells to remove the player's souls from inside it. It looks like you go inside, take some damage, and then leave, because if it fills up with players' souls, he'll just one-shot the raid. So yeah, it's a bit weird. You're going to be soaking to make sure that the stacks don't go too high while placing debuffs around the edges of the room, and whilst dealing with this Fellseeker style ability, as well as the Eyes of Gul'dan, as well as the Fel style.
Yeah, it really does feel like that last phase is all about managing managing how much room you have to play with, essentially.
Well, yeah, because of course you still got all the fires from the
sure.
empowered liquid Hellfire as well. So that phase looks to be pretty nuts. But yeah, that seems to be the fight. It's a shame we didn't get to see that phase. Of course, as we said before, we will be doing a full guide once we actually get to see the entire boss on live servers. But we can still give a little bit of feedback, because as you said, it definitely was buggy in some places with that Bonds of Fel ability particularly, where like there'll be like 10 people stacked up, the person breaks the bonds, and 3 people just die, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
And they just wasn't sharing the damage for some reason.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird.
So hopefully that's fixed before live.
Also, there's this horrible FPS issue in there, like the animation of the bubble in phase 1, it like for some reason melts a couple of our people's computers, as well as because you can see pretty much most of the broken aisles while you're up there. If you've got like a large draw distance, it really destroys your computer, so you might need to turn that down. But either way, I really liked the fight, what we saw of it. I like the idea of having these extra action buttons, which even though it might be removed in phase 3, it says it's like tampered with and you can't use them properly in phase 3, but it's like going to be quite interesting to make choices around it. Like as a DPS, do I always assign it so it's lined up with my cooldowns, or do I need to use it for particular mechanics? And the thing is, it gives you movement speed as well.
And the thing is, you actually need to be good while you have it up.
Yeah, because
otherwise it gets removed.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like a really nice thing. And like the tanks, it seems like have multiple opportunities in phase 2 to use that damage immunity thing. Do you want to use it for the Fel Scythe at 100 stacks, or would you rather save it for when the Fel Lord is like really empowered, all that kind of stuff? Yeah, it looks to be really good. It's a bit Manoroth-y though.
Yeah, I mean, I like the encounter. I don't particularly like phase 1 because it's like we're fighting 3 random dudes who I've never heard of before.
Oh, right, okay.
It's like they're a bit shit and their mechanics are a bit lackluster. It's like kill the guy before too many eyes spawn. Okay, now just chill.
It is like that,
That is literally it. Like the other guy's abilities are pretty meh. Whereas phase 2 is just mental. It's absolutely mental. Those bonds are just elite. It's just such a horrible mechanic to have to deal with.
Yeah.
Like in a good way. Like in a good way. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about the fight. I enjoyed testing him, but I really wish we saw phase 3. I think that's where the fun starts.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a fear that it might be similar to Manoroth, where it might become quite repetitive. And like you're kind of dealing with the same stuff, especially if he has like a lot of health.
Yeah.
He does seem to have a fair amount, but our pulls were quite short, so we can't really tell. Maybe phase 3 really shakes it up and turns it into something else. But I always felt with something like similar to Manoroth, where although he's got these cool things, it's kind of like you're doing the same thing for 10 minutes. You have like that ad phase at the beginning where you got to kill 3 mini bosses, and then you got to go and kill him, and he does the same shit for a long period of time. So I'm kind of hoping that isn't the case. He doesn't become like repetitive in that way. But yeah.
Well, definitely considering on Mythic there's an extra phase as well.
Yes, spoiler warning. We're going to be fighting a big demon Illidan, apparently. A demonic, like, tampered with Illidan. Khadgar fucks something up and we're fighting Illidan for some reason. So yeah, we're going to be doing that. That should be really fun. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. But that's all we got time for in this preview. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed it, then do drop us down a like. There will be a live guide for Gul'dan as soon as we got it done. There'll be a link for that in the description as well as in the comments of this video. And before we do go, thank you very much to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You guys are awesome. If you'd like to join these group of people, a link for that is in the description as well. And we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.